at the end of the day, it was cheaper than buying them at auction, period, end of sentence. It was just cheaper. And we didn't have all the fees, and we got a better car. Better story, locally owned, privately owned, all the great things that come with that. And we were able to see all that ahead of time. So we also had an educated decision to make on were we willing to step up or not. But in many cases, it was between 2 and 8% cost to market difference from an auction purchase.
Hey, Jason Rice here. This is another, what we call a view from the top. We used to do these Up Bus podcasts, and this is kind of a carryover. But our view from the top is something we share in our weekly newsletter here at LawPop. And what that is people out there in the trenches on our team, out there dealing with dealerships and going over kind of their issues and concerns. And this week, we brought one of our performance engineers, Jeremy, on, and he's going to go over some stocking strategies, basically private party acquisitions. And the reason why we brought Jeremy on for this, he did come from the dealership world not too long ago. As a matter of fact, they went from buying no cars off the street to over 200 cars off the street each month. So without further ado, Jeremy, if you want to give everybody here kind of a little bit of your background.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Jason. My background has basically been in dealerships from the basically graduating high school through up to a year and a half ago. Done a little bit of everything. I was into fixed ops. I've done variable, worked outside in the parking lot, a little bit of everything. And most recently worked with a dealership that was one of our high performers in Lot Walk and Lot Pop. Learned a lot there through COVID and after COVID. So, very thankful for that experience and all my experiences through all the 20 years or 20 plus years in the dealerships, and led me here to Lot Walk.
All right, perfect. And so your title this week was this is the largest source of stress in dealerships. And what we're talking about is acquisition of vehicles. And then, like I said, what we really focused on this article was private party acquisitions, because the hardest part about private party is, one, I guess, having the commitment, right? Is it a team? Is it a single person? Is it, everybody in your sales team? Do we have, I know we talk about having a buying center, BBC vehicle buying center, people that will actually help. All they do is call, email, and text customers to try to get their cars. Kind of what do you think the best approach is right now on trying to acquire those private party acquisitions?
I think the best approach is who do you have on your team that can do the work, and how do you want to climb the mountain? As we'll see in the article when it gets posted, if you follow our newsletter, please sign up for that. But there's a lot of ways to climb the mountain on private party, and how you get there. Both can work, but it's really the commitment and sticking with it and saying we are going to do this. There really aren't options. If you're going to do it, you can't go halfway. You got to be all in. I prefer, it does take a few more humans and hands in the to get it done, but I do prefer that there are some gates per se, meaning is this the right car? Are we putting the right money in it versus maybe a cradle to grave scenario? Most dealerships are doing cradle to grave because they find that one person and let them do the whole thing, and they kind of let them on an island. It can work if it's the right person, but many times the dealership thinks they have the right person, and that doesn't work out, and it just sort of falls by the wayside. Whether it's oversight, management, goals, coaching, teaching, training, any of the above, I prefer the method of having different stages in the process. The outreach, the engagement officer, vehicle buying center rep, very similar to like a BDC in a sense, but outbound. We're going to go out, we're going to find the business, we're going to start conversations, and then we're going to turn that over to an appraiser. They give the value. The value gets put back to the customer from that VBC agent, and there's more to it than that. That's the method that I was a part of, helped build and grow. But I've seen it be successful in other ways. The other way from cradle to grave is definitely harder to scale, because if you have one good person, do you have 2, 3, 4 good people to multiply? That's hard. That's difficult to do. So I tend to find that from my approach, what I've learned and what I've witnessed, I like having its own department being built with multiple levels.
And so that appraiser, so that's the other thing too, is, it's not so much having somebody call, email, text, get somebody in, send it over to appraiser, get the car appraised, and then try to close the deal. But also, most people probably want you to come to them. You're trying to acquire their car. So being able to have somebody to be able to be remote, to be able to go and drive to those cars and have the ability to write a check, right? So that was another part of that element too, wasn't it?
Yeah, very much so. And we're doing outbound. We're soliciting the business in a sense, even though the customer raised their hand, put that vehicle online to say, I want to sell my car. We don't know how many miles away that is. The dealership I worked in, and it wasn't super concentrated area. We had to go a lot of distance to find that vehicle, and they weren't just willing to stop what they were doing in their life to drive it to us for us to maybe buy it. We really had to go that way. So, and that also is, different store to store. But at the end of the day, the customer, the way we will win in the dealership world in private party is convenience and speed. Can we make it convenient for them, and how fast can we get it done? That's the holdup a lot of times why people don't sell to other. It takes forever. Do they have good money? Are they trustworthy? All of these private party challenges that come from a seller standpoint, the dealership can solve for them, but are we committed to doing it?
Yeah, and that's where the other area I think is the other concern as far as getting somebody in the door. Even if you want to schedule time to come to them, is do you give them a range to even get their interest to come to schedule one way or the other, or do you give a penny perfect? And if you give do you give the higher end of the range, a lower end of the range? That's where I think a lot of dealers struggle. Also, what you guys do with that, or what's some best practices there?
And this is definitely a point of contention. If I know we do a lot of Clubhouse talk on Friday. There's a Clubhouse room that we get into, and that's a big point of contention. And people see this very differently. Um, you really got to find what works for you. What worked for us was penny perfect, and we tried to stick to it. We didn't try to do penny perfect, bring them in and talk them down that number, try to change that number. When we went to their home, we didn't try to negotiate that number unless absolutely something wasn't disclosed, right? We try to gather. You really have the steps to building this is getting as much information as possible before you make a commitment to the customer. You have to, because otherwise it's on you. If you don't get all the information, you're going to put yourself at risk to look like the bad guy when you try to change that number. We were penny perfect. I don't like ranges. The customer will always assume they want to get the highest end of the range. We want to try to get at the lowest end of the range. It just doesn't seem to work. I never liked that idea. I know it does work. I know it works out there. But I'm more penny perfect. We would do it if a customer was at our front door as an appraisal. If they were trading the car, we give them penny perfect on a worksheet. Why would we do it any differently when we're trying to buy it from the street?
Yeah, and you're talking about that Clubhouse. I know it's like David Long who likes to say the range, right? Brian Kramer says penny perfect, but I think they agreed on a middle ground there where, yeah, if the customer's shopping around and you're just reaching out of them out of the cold, and I think a range is a good way to start the conversation, right? And obviously, as you get further down that buying funnel and the customer decides to go ahead and say, yeah, I'll sell it to you for how much, or hey, before I make the 2 hour trip to you, I want to know the number. That's when the penny perfect comes into play. So I think that's their kind of common ground was a little bit of both, right? So I could see that point of view. And here, some of the things that you're talking about, and I'm going to read from it. It says the reason for creating this department should be clear and obvious, but in the event that you need a little more convincing, here are a few reasons to do this now. I don't know if you have enough off the top of your head, but I could start with one: lower cost of market, right? Was there a certain 2 to 3% lower cost of market? What range did you guys see when your private party acquisitions?
Yeah, and I think it wavered at times, based on the market, based on what we were buying. I think that wavered some, the gap between, the better cost to market versus auction. But we compared it to a trade. It wasn't that dissimilar cost to market from what we were trading our cars at the time. I don't expect it to be exactly like a trade because, most customers, the reason they're trying to sell it private party is they couldn't trade it. The dealer that they wanted to trade it to or tried to trade it to didn't give them enough. We wanted to make it a worthwhile number for the customer. If it was a very valuable car to us, we were willing to step up and make it work. At the end of the day, it was cheaper than buying them at auction. Period. End of sentence. It was just cheaper, and we didn't have all the fees, and we got a better car, better story, locally owned, privately owned, all the great things that come with that, and we were able to see all that ahead of time. So we also had an educated decision to make on were we willing to step up or not. But in many cases, it was between 2 and 8% cost to market difference from an auction purchase, and sometimes better than that. But it was hard to compare at times only because the cars that we could go find from the public, you weren't necessarily finding at the auction. They weren't there. It just didn't exist. The auction had very repeatable type vehicles. So, that was a hard thing to really just say, well, it's this versus that. But I would tell you between 2 and 8 to 10% at times cost to market difference.
Now, obviously, a lot of that's transportation and fees, right? That's probably the 2%, where you stepped up for the customer, but you were saving transportation and the auction fees. And the 8%, obviously, if you're able to get that car without having to bid against 20 other people, right? And the hard part is, even now, a lot of focus has been put on private party acquisition. Like when you first started out, right after COVID, to start doing this, that market was wide open, and now everybody seems to be focusing there. The difference is, because that's the other frustration I think with a lot of dealers, is like, man, everybody's doing it now and I can't get anything. But that's the thing, they give up. Most 80, 90, probably 95% of the dealers pursuing that car will give up after one or two tries. And I think that's kind of the key. Did you find that being the case? Like, customer says, hey, give me a few weeks, I'm going to try to sell it on my own, and you follow up 30, 40, 60 days later and able to acquire it because they just kind of got fed up of that and nobody else followed up. Is that kind of one of the tricks of the trade too?
For sure. And that might have been, there was a lot of challenges and a lot of things that we learned and a lot of things we didn't want to repeat. But one of the things that really developed when the market got tougher to do this and it did become more competitive, and post COVID, a lot of people had equity and they were just looking to sell it to get their cash. As that got further and further from COVID, that became tighter and tighter, and there were more people with negative equity having to cut checks and wanting to dump the payment, and that became very challenging. And it very much was, we really had to adapt and learn a follow-up strategy. And, as most people, well, if they haven't found out, they're going to. CRMs aren't built to set up for buying off the street follow-up. They're not built that way. There aren't stock, you want a stock number with it, there's task. It just doesn't work well. So we had to come up with our own strategies and sort of tracking in a way. And each rep, and we developed some of those things on follow-up and staying with that customer and saying, hey, if we were within X amount of money from day one, let's see if that car's still out there in 15, 21, 28 days, 30 days, and follow back up. And there were absolutely vehicles we purchased and the market moved. So the customer could see it, they knew it, we knew it, and they said, well, we got to do something. And they would end up selling us the vehicle. And many times we obviously had to reappraise the vehicles. We learned from that too. There'd be a 2 week difference. We had to reappraise the car. But our customers, then we had to stay with them because the market was moving so fast. They saw it moving so fast and they were like, wow, I got to do this. You guys are the best. You're going to come to me. Your money's good. Let's do a deal.
Yeah, because that's the other thing right now. Instead of cars going up in value, which you had a lot of luck there, hey, I can give you $1,000 more than I'm quoting you 2 weeks ago. I think we're going opposite now. And so to be able to not only have a CRM, you mentioned CRMs, when you get a lead on a car to buy, you can't really market sold in your CRM because you didn't sell them anything, right? It could skew the numbers. But, it's also just the ability to maybe notify the customers, kind of like a Zillow or Zillow, whatever you pronounce it as, on your house values. It's either up or down. And I think if you show a customer, hey, your car's worth 20 grand, a week later, 19.5, a week later, 19, they might start, jumping at that opportunity quicker instead of just trying to sell it themselves and holding out. And I guess that's just up to educating customers on those values and how that continues to happen. So kind of not necessarily wrap this up, but let's say a dealer is wanting to do this. What would be step one, step two, step three? Step one would be what?
Commitment that we're going to do this. Like, it's not a halfway. It's not, we'll see how it goes. It is, we are going to do this. If they're committed to it, just like anything, it can be built around the staff they currently have. It can be built around hiring some new staff to bring in to develop a department. But it's absolutely number one, a commitment.
So then step two would be figuring out that
I would think,
personnel there.
yeah, I think it's either figuring out, do we start look internally first, and how do we want to do the framework? Do we want it to be a cradle to grave one person, or do we want to build? Hey, we're going to have an outreach, sort of like a vehicle buying center rep, and have some folks appraise for them. It's really the structure and how you want to do it. So then you can start to identify okay, I can do my one person, or I can have one or two people start this, and then it's scalable from there. So it's number one is commitment. Number two is what's the structure going to look like? Who's going to do it? How many people?
And then three, it's a pay plan then, or is it, what do you think? Obviously, you got that's part of that structure, but what would step three be? Just jump.
Yeah, the structure matters. The pay plan obviously matters. Number three is I believe the management of it and who's going to set up goals and who's going to set up and help manage and structure it. You can't just leave two people on an island without guidance. And some of that's going to have to be, someone's going to have to reach out and ask questions to someone who's done it before. But it really then is who is going to hold those people or person accountable to goals. How are we going to get there? What's the coaching teaching look like? And really, the KPIs and data tracking to make sure it stays on course.
Yeah, and I think too, even if you decide if it's sales team or a VBC, vehicle buying center, dedicated team, you need your whole store buy-in. A couple things would be, let's say you have a VBC and all they're doing call, email, text, and they get the people in the door, appraiser appraises it. No salespeople are involved, right? But you got to get your sales team in the game too. And, a couple pay plan things that we talk about at the 20 group, you guys might have chimed in on some of this, because a lot of times dealers are like, oh yeah, I'll give our sales team or my service drive another 100, $200, they buy a car. Well, that typically wasn't enough. Just think about what you would pay. I mean, to me, it wasn't enough to encourage it to get very aggressive on it. And, think about what you would pay in transportation or auction fees. And I would at least give that to my team than the auction. The other thing that a lot of people did was the sales team, if they're, built on volume or hit bonuses on volume, they allowed, if they bought a car, not only to get a bonus, but it went toward that volume. If, a $500 bonus is at car 15. Well, they sold 14 and bought one that put them at 15 to get that bonus. And so I think not just committing to a VBC who's handling calling, email, texting, writing checks, but getting the whole team bought in there. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, that's a great point, and it's probably my fault for not even mentioning that. In the most successful months that we had during that time, it was a huge buy-in from the sales team. I forget the exact number, but if we bought 200 that month, it was in the range of 50 to 60 were from the sales floor. Pretty big sales floor, but 50 to 60 of those units were bought from the sales team also getting out there. So it's no shortage of vehicles. It's just how many are you willing to go appraise, look at, and talk to get those numbers.
So we don't pitch here. I don't get a bird dog fee for any company, but a couple of things if you want to start this out. Like VINQ has a really good, I know you guys started with that, a private party acquisition tool combining all the Craigslist, Facebook Marketplace, Auto Trader, private sellers, cars.com, whatever, into one tool to communicate with those consumers. There's also Van Vehicle Acquisition Network, and they've not only have their own product, but I understand they integrate it with Viato. I know that was something they announced at NADA. To be able to help acquire cars that way. I don't know the extent of their product as far as communicating with the customers, but there's at least two there that I know of off the top of my head that can help you do this. Jeremy, is there anything else you want to say before we wrap this up?
No, you got it, man. I appreciate the opportunity to speak on this a little bit, and I think the overarching topic is acquisition, and it's getting more and more difficult, more and more challenging, harder and harder to take a vehicle at auction and turn around and make some money on it, especially at the numbers dealers have been used to post COVID. It's getting harder and harder to do, and if they want to preserve some of that, I believe this investment will go a long way. So get started now. What are you waiting for?
Perfect. Thank you for your time, Jeremy. And then check out our next episode, View from the Top. Every week we push these out. And again, sign up for the newsletter to stay ahead of it. And I hope you guys have a great day. Thank you.